This week we're going to take one of these cedar cookies and make it into a beautiful platter that looks like this. Stay tuned to see how that was done. So this is going to be this week's project. I'm going to take one of these 3 cookies and make a platter out of it. Just a small shallow bowl. And I think I'm going to start with this guy. Now, this is Western red cedar, and it was green. It was only cut down about a month ago, and surprisingly, it's very dry. It's at about 15%. Now, it's just a little over an inch thick, so that's definitely sped it up. Also, I'm sure the shape of it helps, gives you more surface area to dry. And cedar is a very open grain, so the combination of those things has allowed it to dry very quickly. I'm going to take it and put it into my kiln and let it dry a little bit more before I turn it. For those that are interested, this is my kiln. I've shown this on a previous video, but it's just a light bulb underneath that piece of tin foil as a heat source. And in at the back, on the side of the cardboard box, is a computer fan that pulls air in through the tin foil, in through here, in through the box, and then it exits out this opening here. The book is just there to keep the flaps closed. For a kiln, you want air movement and you want a low heat source. A light bulb is plenty of heat for something this size. Matter of fact, sometimes that's too much. In which case I just pull this heat shield back to allow more air in here to reduce the temperature. But for now, I've got the heat shield up, so most of the air is coming in through the back here, going across the light bulb. So as you can imagine, not a lot of heat, but just enough to dry it out. I'm going to leave it in there for a few days, check on it, and then once it gets down to 10% or so, we'll go ahead and turn this. So an update, it went in the kiln at 15%. An hour later it was down to 12 and it was starting to crack a little bit. So I put some CA glue on it, put it back in the kiln, but this time just with a fan, no heat. Cedar is drying very quickly. So I'm going to use a faceplate, but this piece is only a little over an inch thick. I'm not going to bother with the screws. I'm just going to use some hot melt glue. This cedar is extremely light, so it's not going to take a lot to hold it into place. So here I'm just marking the tenon that I want to cut. Again, because this piece is so shallow, I'm not going to go very deep, and also it's light, so I don't need a very big tenon. I just use my skew chisel to mark where that tenon is going to be. And then outside of that tenon, I'm going to create a second rim, which is where the bowl is going to sit on. As normal, I'm going to turn the bottom first, which is what you're seeing here. I'm going to turn the bottom and then flip it around on the tenon and then hollow out the inside. Cedar cuts very easy, although you can see the shavings coming off. They're small, they're not big and curly. The other thing you'll notice is the cedar does have the bark on it, but it's not nice bark. It's pretty stringy, and most of it's coming off as I'm turning. I'm not even going to try and save the bark, and you'll see later on how I manage that. Here you can see my lathe bed as well as my hands. You can see that the dust, the very fine pink dust there, is an indication of how it's cutting. It's very dry, and again, the shavings are very small. Because of the irregular shape, I do turn it as fast as I can so that it won't catch as it's going around, and so far it's not been an issue. Here I'm using my negative rake scraper to just finish up the bottom. Once I go over that, that'll pretty well be the end of turning the bottom of this. Just for reference, this section is at 4 times speed, but the outside of this bowl was done in probably 5 or 10 minutes total. But I want to take a time to point out a Christmas gift I got, which is this light right here. And I gotta say, I do know that before I would often finish a piece and then I would see a few things that I didn't like. This light really helps me. Like I can see, I don't know if you can see it there, but there's just a very fine line right there. So now with the light, without the light, I could never see that. But now I can. It makes a big difference. Again, I'm talking about very, very fine lines that are almost impossible to see. But they make a difference. They make a difference between maybe being able to sell a piece and not being able to sell a piece, or at least for the value that you want in it. So I can't say enough, invest in a good light. There. Now, I don't see any scratches whatsoever. So I'll go ahead and confidently apply finish to this. Because it is cedar, so it is a soft wood, I'm going to put CA glue, and it's going to take a bit, but I'm going to put it all in here on these tabs where the wood is very soft, and that'll soak in there and stiffen those grains up. So I'm hoping that will prevent any cracking and loss of those ears. So I'm going to put this on. I'm not going to use accelerator. And the reason I'm not using accelerator is I don't want to... accelerator will make the glue set up very quickly. And that's fine for most times when you're fixing two pieces. But in this case, I want the glue to permeate into the wood. So I don't want it setting up very fast. So I'd rather have time to absorb into the wood before it hardens up. So I'm not going to be using the accelerator in this case. So I'll let this dry for half an hour or so. I've got another project I'm working on, and which will be another video. I sometimes work on more than one at a time. And we'll let this sit up and then we'll mount it back on the lathe and begin hollowing the inside out. I didn't show the hollowing out of the inside of the bowl. Small diameter, it's hard to get a good shot. Most of the time my big fat head is in the way. But it turns very similar to the outside. Again, I just turn it at high speed and take very light cuts. The next thing I do before I get into sanding is I like to put a coat of sanding sealer on it. Again, because this is a soft wood, the sanding sealer helps stiffen the fibers up and it makes it easier to sand. The sanding sealer is just as easy just to apply with a brush. Pour a little bit on and then brush it in. I mentioned this earlier, but this cedar doesn't have good bark. It's very stringy, and most of it come off, as you can see. So it did leave kind of a rough surface, and so what I decided to do is use a torch and burn it. And it just accentuates the edge and gives it a really nice look, and it also helps clean up some of that stringy bark that you saw. I did some more sanding off camera, and I just did the sanding off the lathe, just with my drill, but not mounted in the lathe and not spinning. And the cedar sand's very easy, so this wasn't hard to do. Now I've got it mounted in a friction drive. You've seen me do this before. You can see there that ghost spinning around is just an anti-slip cloth that I have over a piece of wood. And then I have the bowl mounted upside down, and the live center is pushing against the tenon that was there. And I'm just using my gouge to remove that tenon. When I do this, I take very light cuts, and I tend to put all the force pushing against the bottom of the bowl and try not to do too much side load, because as you can see there, it just stopped a second ago. So it's just friction, so it doesn't take a lot to stop it. So again, you want to use light cuts and not a lot of side load. I stopped it here with a very small nib just in the bottom of the bowl, but that'll easily sand off. So here's the final product. It turned out to be about 9 inches in diameter, and it's very shallow, less than an inch. It does have a bit of a bowl shape, but very little. As you saw in the video, the edges of it are burnt, removing the bark but leaving a nice textured finish. Here it is with my logo engraved into the bottom. I hope you enjoyed this product. Don't forget to leave a comment, and if you want to be entered into the contest, leave a comment saying contest. Thank you.